The emergence of the Russian capital and its strengthening is one of the most mysterious questions in history. It is closely intertwined with the feuds of princes, nobles' intrigues, and Mongol Khans' campaigns. Therefore, many people have the impression that Moscow emerged as a strong and powerful kingdom, ready to conquer Siberia almost immediately. However, it took 3 centuries from the time the small provincial Moscow appeared before it became the capital of a great empire. In 1147, Suzdal Prince Yuri Vladimirovich, better known in history by his nickname Dolgoruki, invited Sviatoslav Ogovich for negotiations. The meeting took place in the newly built city of Moscow. Yuri Dolgoruki obtained land and resources for the construction from his boyar Stepan Kuchka after his execution for unknown reasons. Some chroniclers believe that Stepan was plotting against the prince, while others wrote that he did not want to give his daughter in marriage to the prince's son. Russian historian Vasily Tatashev believed that Stepan Kuchka had a romance with the prince's wife and even tried to escape with her, which however cost him his life. After this initial mention in the chronicles, Moscow disappears from the pages of history for centuries. It is known that in 1238, like other cities of the Vladimir Principality, it was burned by the Mongol armies of Khan Beta. The Mongol invasion was a catastrophe for Rus. However, this event spurred the rise of Moscow. It was rebuilt by Prince Yaroslav Vsevolodovich. He handed Moscow over to his son Mikhail Yaroslavich Kurabrit, nicknamed the Brave for his courage. However, Mikhail ruled for a short time and 2 years later moved to Vladimir. Moscow lost its status as a principality capital for 20 years, but soon his nephew, Prince Daniil Alexandrovich, settled in Moscow. He was destined to become the founder of the Moscow princely dynasty. Throughout his life, Daniil spent most of his time at war between his brothers, Dmitry, Prince of Vladimir, and Andrei, Prince of Gorodets. Daniil sided with Dmitry and even managed to defeat Andrei. However, Prince Andrei refused to acknowledge defeat. He called on the Mongols for help, hoping to become the Prince of Vladimir with their assistance. At the same time, the Mongols plundered and burned all the cities of the principality. Moscow was also burned, forcing its Prince Daniil to acknowledge his brother's supremacy. After some time, Daniil of Moscow also began his conquests. The first to suffer was the Principality of Ryazan. In 1301, Moscow seized Kolomna from Ryazan with the help of the betrayal of Ryazan's boyar Pekost. The following year, in the struggle against the Principality of Smolensk, Moscow captured Mozhask. Another year later, Daniil conquered Pereslavl-Zaleski. However, these were his last conquests as the prince passed away the same year in Moscow. Daniil's son, Prince Yuri, found Moscow's principality insufficient. He sought the throne in Vladimir. However, Yuri's claims were immediately challenged by Prince Mikhail Yaroslavich of Tver. Mikhail was a talented military leader who easily defeated his young opponent and besieged Moscow. Daniil acknowledged the Vladimir throne for Mikhail and ceded Pereslavl-Zaleski to him. However, he did not abandon his claims. After a long wait, Yuri formed an alliance with Uzbek Khan and married his sister. He also formed an alliance with Novgorod, which would attack Mikhail from the north. In 1317, Yuri, in alliance with the Mongols, confronted Mikhail of Tver, who was engaged in a war with Novgorod. Despite this, Mikhail successfully defeated the forces of Novgorod, swiftly redirected his troops southward, and triumphed over the combined Moscow and Mongol armies in the Battle of Bortnevo. Yuri fled the battlefield and sought refuge with Uzbek Khan, while his wife Konchaka fell into the hands of the Tver prince, where she passed away that same year. Yuri promptly seized the opportunity. He persuaded Uzbek to punish Mikhail Yaroslavich for the death of his sister. The Tver prince was summoned to the Golden Horde and executed. As a reward, Yuri of Moscow received the Vladimir Principality triumphantly. However, Yuri's reign in Vladimir was short-lived. Within 2 years, the Mongols captured him for failing to pay the tribute he owed them. Yuri then fled to Novgorod, and his younger brother Ivan took control of Moscow. In 1325, Prince Yuri attempted to reclaim his principality and traveled to the Golden Horde. However, it was there that he was killed by Dmitry of Tver, nicknamed the Fearsome Eyes or the Terrible Eyes. seeking vengeance for the treacherous death of his father Mikhail. Ivan, who received Moscow from his brother, was nicknamed Khalida during his lifetime. The reason for this nickname is unknown with certainty. Some chroniclers suggest that he had a habit of giving money to the poor from his purse called kalita. Other chronicles attribute it to his love for money and frugality. However, some accuse Ivan of appropriating money collected as tribute for the Golden Horde. However, it should be noted that Ivan Khalida proved to be a skilled diplomat and politician. In his youth, he supported Metropolitan Peter of Vladimir, whom other bishops accused of embezzlement. A friendship developed between the prince and the Metropolitan. Therefore, as soon as Khalida became prince, Metropolitan Peter moved to Moscow. From then on, Moscow became the new religious center of the Vladimir Principality. In 1327, a rebellion against the Mongols erupted in Tver. The inhabitants of Tver killed Mongol envoys who came for tribute, then gathered forces from neighboring lands, preparing for war against the Golden Horde. Ivan Khalida seized this opportunity to eliminate his long-standing rival, the Tver Principality. He went to Khan Uzbek and, receiving troops from him, marched on Tver. The Allied forces easily defeated the rebellious people of Tver, then plundered and burned their capital. After this, Ivan Khalida received the Kostroma Principality from the Mongols as a gift for faithful service, along with the right to collect tribute from Novgorod. In the following year, Ivan Khalida defeated the weakened Rostov Principality, which was weakened by civil war, and took over the lands of Beluzero. This region, rich in fur, was important for Moscow's income and became a center for raids on neighboring tribes. Then, in 1331, Ivan Khalida purchased from Khan Uzbek the right to rule over the Vladimir and Nizhny Novgorod principalities. After that, Khalida attempted to capture Novgorod. To achieve this, he prematurely seized Torzhok and began preparing to besiege Novgorod. However, the people of Novgorod found an ally in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Khalida backed out of the war, but after 5 years he returned to the idea and eventually organized a campaign into the Novgorod lands along the Dvina River. However, he was defeated and Khalida returned to Moscow. This marked the beginning of a century-long confrontation between Moscow and Novgorod. Having suffered defeat in the war, Khalida turned to what he knew best and continued to buy lands. By the time of his death, he managed to purchase the Galak-Mursky, Siraj, Uglik, and Pereslov-Zaleski principalities from local princes. The new Moscow prince was Simeon the Proud. He immediately faced intrigues from his younger brother Ivan the Fair and the boyars. Meanwhile, the Suzdal Principality took Nizhny Novgorod from Moscow. Additionally, there was an ongoing war with Novgorod, which was initiated by their father Ivan Khalida. Soon after, the Novgorod forces defeated the Moscow army at Jabki and reclaimed the city. Then Simeon began to weave intrigues independently. First, he executed all supporters of his brother Ivan and resettled him in Moscow to prevent him from uprising. Afterward, he persuaded the residents of Shabki to rebel against the Novgorod authorities and sowed discord between Novgorod and their allies Lithuania. Following this, he helped Pskov to separate from Novgorod. Then the Novgorod people themselves asked for peace with Moscow. However, in 1353 an epidemic of the plague struck Moscow, and Prince Simeon died from it. His brother Ivan II, known as Ivan the Fair, finally became the prince. However, his rule was short and unremarkable. Upon Ivan the Fair's death, his son Dmitry Ivanovich, known as Dmitry Donskoy, became the prince. It was during Dmitry's reign that the first stone fortifications of Moscow were built, known in history as the White Stone Kremlin. During this time, a civil war erupted in the neighboring Golden Horde, known in history as the Great Troubles. In this conflict, Dmitry Donskoy allied with one of the Mongol commanders, Mamay, and even conducted a campaign against the Volga Bulgars in 1370 to force them to make peace with Mamay. Dmitry also had to wage war against the Principality of Tver, which formed an alliance with Lithuania and attempted to regain lost positions. Dmitry invaded Tver twice but suffered defeat. On the other hand, the Lithuanian Tver armies besieged Moscow 3 times but failed to capture it as well. Eventually, a peace treaty was signed in Lubetsk in 1372, according to which Lithuania renounced its claim to Moscow, and Moscow renounced its claims to Tver. After this, Dmitry turned his ambitions southward and attempted to capture the Principality of Ryazan. Initially, everything went successfully. He even installed his rulers in Ryazan. But here Dmitry's interests clashed with those of Mame, who returned Ryazan to its previous princes. Thus relations between Dmitry and Mame soured. Dmitry gathered an alliance of Vladimir princes and Pereslav-Zaleski to fight against Mame. However, the Tver people refused to join, so Dmitry organized a campaign against Tver, besieged the city, and forced them to join the alliance. After this, he declared war on Mame, and his forces attacked the Volga Bulgars and plundered them. In response, Mame twice defeated Dmitry's army. However, as successful as the war against Dmitry was for Mame, it was equally unsuccessful against the Mongol Khan Toktamish. In 1379, Toktamish defeated Mame on the Kalka River and forced him to flee north with the remnants of his army. Upon learning of this, Dmitry again gathered the armies of all the Vladimir princes and swiftly marched to intercept Mame. Both armies met at Kalikovo Field. Even now, it is uncertain exactly where it is located, but it is most likely in the upper reaches of the Don River. Here, Prince Dmitry successfully defeated Mame's army in 1380, and Mame fled the battlefield. It was for this victory that the prince received the nickname Donskoy. However, the joy of victory did not last long. 2 years later, Toktamish launched a campaign against Moscow. Dmitry Donskoy saved himself by fleeing to Kostroma, but the Mongols captured Moscow, slaughtering the entire city. According to various reports, between 10,000 to 25,000 people were killed. After this, Dmitry of the Don recognized the supremacy of the Mongol Khan Toktamish. To replenish his wealth, in 1386 Dmitry Donskoy organized a campaign against Novgorod, besieged the city, and only withdrew after receiving a ransom of 8,000 rubles in silver. With these funds, shortly before his death in 1389, Dmitry Donskoy redeemed the Orel, Mitrov, and Uglik princedoms from Toktamish. After the death of Dmitry Donskoy, his son Vasily I became the new prince. He was the first in his dynasty to take the title Grand Prince of Moscow and centralize power by forcing local princes to move to Moscow to prevent them from starting rebellions in their domains. He also continued the tradition of land redemption. In 1393, he redeemed the Nizhny Novgorod and Murom principalities. Shortly before he died, he also acquired Tula Vivaka and Bezetsky Verk after his death. The title was succeeded by his young son Vasily II. He twice lost power, and the Principality of Moscow was embroiled in a civil war for a quarter of a century. It all began in 1433 with the wedding of Vasily II and Maria Yaroslavna. All the Moscow princes who were at the wedding quarreled, started a brawl, and initiated a war. As a result, Vasily II lost the Principality of Moscow, and his uncle Yuri of Gallic-Mursky, also known as Yuri Dmitrievich, became the new prince. However, after Yuri's death, Vasily II quickly regained power. But the second reign of Vasily II was marked by high taxes and the cruel and arbitrary actions of the prince. Against him rose his brothers. They captured Vasily and blinded him. Thus Vasily II earned the nickname the Blind or the Dark. Dmitry Shemyoka became the Prince of Moscow, but his rule was short-lived because Vasily the Dark reclaimed the throne within a year by organizing a conspiracy against Dmitry. In 1451, Vasily the Dark captured the Principality of Suzdal, which had once supported Prince Dmitry Shemyoka. In 1456, Vasily the Dark launched a campaign against Novgorod. With numerical superiority and the support of Mongol cavalry, he defeated the Novgorod people in the Battle of Rus and concluded a treaty in Yetselbitsy, according to which Novgorod became an ally of the Moscow Principality. Prince Vasily II the Dark died in 1462, the next prince of Moscow. Ivan III went down in history as the Great because he expanded the boundaries of the Moscow possessions the most. The first to come under Ivan III's attack was the Yaroslavl Principality, the lands of which he appropriated in 1463, although he allowed local rulers to retain the title of Yaroslavl princes. During negotiations with Novgorod envoys in 1471, Ivan III began to mock Novgorod for its republican system. the Novgorod people announced the termination of all agreements between them and Moscow. In response, Ivan III organized a campaign, quickly capturing Volokholamsk and Torzhok and heading towards Novgorod. Afterwards, he divided his army into three parts. One went to plunder the wealthy cities along the northern Vena. The other part, under the command of Boyar, Daniil Vasilyevich, consisting mainly of cavalry, including Tatar allies of the prince, went to Novgorod. After burning down Rus, the Moscow and Novgorod armies met on the banks of the Shelin River. The Novgorod army, which mainly consisted of infantry, suffered a catastrophic defeat in this battle. Novgorod was forced to sign the humiliating Korostin peace treaty, as a result of which it became dependent on Moscow. On his way home, Ivan III also captured the weakened Principality of Rostov. Then, in 1472, he organized a campaign against the Principality of Perm, where the Komi people lived. With overwhelming numerical superiority, the Moscow forces easily defeated them and seized their lands. In 1477, the people of Novgorod rebelled and killed the pro-Moscow rulers, after which they refused to ally with Moscow. In response, Ivan III launched a new campaign against Novgorod and besieged the city, which lasted for over a year. When famine struck Novgorod, the townspeople surrendered, and Ivan III incorporated all Novgorod lands into his possessions, abolishing all autonomous rights of the once prosperous trading city. In 1485, Ivan III put an end to the independence of the Tver Principality, which was already surrounded by Moscow's possessions. In 1490, after prolonged wars, Moscow managed to capture the Veka Republic, which had emerged on the lands of the Udmurts, where residents of neighboring principalities fled seeking refuge from constant feuds and other disasters. After this, Ivan III turned his attention to the west. Taking advantage of the departure of the Grand Lithuanian Prince, Moscow forces invaded Lithuania in 1500 and, with numerical superiority, easily defeated the Lithuanians in two battles. Moscow took the Upper Oka and Siveria lands from Lithuania. 5 years after Ivan III's death, Moscow captured Pskov. In 1521, it finally conquered the Ryazan Principality, which had remained independent the longest. This is how the Grand Principality of Moscow began to dominate the region. However, having conquered all the neighboring states, the Moscow state did not stop. Now Moscow turned its gaze to the lands of other ethnic groups, primarily Turkic and other Siberian peoples. Beginning with the reign of Ivan IV the Terrible, Moscow's expansion reached uncontrollable proportions. We have discussed this in detail in this video.